You tell me. Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Leadership. And for this week's conversation, we are going, at least mentally, to Rotterdam in Holland, where we are joined by two lovely guests, two young, we call them Dutch innovators, but they're probably better at introducing themselves than we are. So Eva and Douwe, very nice to have you here. Would you like to introduce each other?
Yeah. Sure. Oh, there's a dog.
Great. I'll go first then, Eva, before the dog, so you can finish barking. Yeah, hi everyone, and nice to see you, I guess, virtually. My name is Douwe, but before I get introduced, I will introduce Eva. Interestingly enough, Eva is a very good friend of mine, so we know each other for a few years now. Eva and I have both done the United World College, which is an international school program where you finish your last 2 years of high school on a scholarship, which has been an amazing experience. And Eva did that in Costa Rica. And afterwards, she has gone back to Rotterdam to study, I think, a double major. That's how ambitious she is in both economics and political science, if I'm correct. And but most importantly, I think what really defines her is her spirit, mostly entrepreneurial spirit, as she has set up and founded a company which uses sludge or dredge coming out of rivers and areas underwater, and she turns that into a very circular product, tiles. And those tiles can be used in cities as a replacement of maybe the old standard, which might still be produced based on more fossil-based composites. And so that's really cool. And then other than that, she's a leader in sustainability in other ways as well, where she's part of the youth climate movement in the Netherlands, which is very active, and very proud to call her my friend. So that's Eva for you.
Thank you, Douwe. It's funny to see how friends see you. And Douwe went to the same high school as I did, but then in Adriatic in Italy. And afterwards he went back, not to Rotterdam where he grew up, but to London, where he has English roots. So he went to London to study there at Queen Mary and UCL. Am I mistaken?
No,
King's. I'm so sorry.
Imperial, yeah.
Imperial. Okay, really.
It's University of London, so it's fine. It's all.
No, yeah. So, and after you studied in London, you came back to Rotterdam to work at the Port Authority here in the energy transition team. And since he has been back, he's not only been working at the Rotterdam Port Authority in energy transition, but he's been doing all types of side projects. So he's campaigning for the Green Left for the next election in March. And besides that, he did all types of academies to get to know the Dutch political landscape better. And Douwe is someone that I think within an institutional context really likes to create change by asking the right questions to the right people. So, and since Corona, we live around the corner from each other. So we've been going on long walks to discuss all types of topics, but energy transition, sustainability, and life included.
Wonderful, wonderful. How energetic, you both seem very energetic and very driven about what you do. And it just sounds, just by listening to you, you get the feeling that you want to know more about it and about the innovation and sustainability and the challenges that we face at the moment. And as I understand it, when you first had contact with Susan, that's also what you spoke about, isn't it? Just after the reasons for going to that particular kind of high school, and then the ideals you had at the time. Isn't that right, Susan?
Yeah. And I was wondering, now hearing what you made of it until now in your life in the field of sustainability and leadership, I was wondering, can you maybe a little bit go back in time to that period when you applied for a place on United World Colleges, and to think back, okay, you were 15 or 16 at the time. What were your ideals, or was your plan in life, and was your thinking about UWC it's an organization which unites people for a sustainable future. So you had some thoughts about that at that early age. So maybe you can share your thoughts with us. How were you?
Do you want to go first, Eva?
I'm thinking I think at that time I was 16. I'm 22 now, so I'm still very young. But I was 16 and I think, or 15 when I applied. And I think what I liked is that I always knew the world was a lot bigger than the place where I grew up. And I grew up in a very privileged, good life. And I just knew the world was so much bigger and I wanted to explore. And I always thought, I'll do that after I'm done with high school. But then I found out that you can also do that in high school. And I think then during UWC or during that time in Costa Rica, I think looking back on it now, I think what was so inspiring, and also I think why, as Douwe said, I have this entrepreneurial spirit right now, is that I got to see that change or changing things just requires people that are enthusiastic about something. And I think that was incredibly inspiring for me to see all the people around me having all types of ideas about the world and how it should or should not be. And I think debating how the world should or should not be is interesting, but I think it's even more interesting to actually do something with what you believe in. And I think I had that in me already before I went, but I think that really accelerated it, but also gave me the tools on how to do something with what you know. But I'm curious how that is for Douwe as well.
Okay, say something about it.
Yeah, no, nicely put. I think what connects Eva and I is that we've both been very privileged in our upbringing and the access we had to opportunities. At the same time, I think in high school here in the Netherlands, I've sensed a feeling of maybe not being able to fully excel at what you do. The Dutch have a saying where kind of goes like, well, just, be normal, because that's already kind of crazy enough, don't blow your own tube. And so that's something that really held me back. And this opportunity, this international school abroad, as you can imagine, seemed just like a very exciting opportunity. And there was these youngsters from all over the world who would come together, all had those same ideals. And so I'll never forget the way that in a school assembly, someone would pitch an idea and everyone would just stand up and be like, oh, let's pick me, or I'm going to join. And that was something I never dared to do beforehand. So that created a lot of excitement and energy, I think, and showed me how much is possible when you work together. I think what Eva said is really true. So it really helped me to find the tools to also enact that change, and instead of just dreaming about it.
But I think it also gave a certain sense of responsibility that I think we all have. I think that's also for me. I remember during the ceremony where we got our scholarship, someone said, and I don't remember who it was, but he at some point said, like, you now have the responsibility to do something with what you can, because you can do it. So it's also your responsibility to do something with that. And I think that is incredibly important. I think that hearing that also changed things for me a lot.
Yeah. And how does that feel for yourself to feel that responsibility to step up?
Well, I think Eva and I, let me speak for myself at least, it is sometimes feel like there's so much going on and there's so much we want to tackle or to face, and sometimes we do need to hold ourselves back. Sometimes it's me telling Eva, well, like, maybe not go for this position because you're already doing this and this and that, and make sure to take care of yourself as well. And I think at the same time she does the same to me. But change doesn't happen overnight, so the responsibility is definitely something we can take on. And again, like I said, I feel that responsibility can be shared, and if you are able to bring people with you, you can carry that load, I would say.
So sometimes it feels overwhelming.
There's a lot to do, I think. And I think, but I think or at least, and that's what I figured out more in university, I think the trick is that we learn so much about the world, and we often learn what's wrong with it, and you read the news, and especially if you're a bit engaged, you know how what type of mess it is, what we were just talking about, because I think it is sometimes a big mess.
Mhm.
But then I think the moment you start doing something about that mess, that also gives you a certain agency, but that also, and you from that point are surrounded with people that also want to do something. And I think that is inspiring and makes it a lot less heavy.
Mhm.
Because it may be a mess, but at least you're doing what you can to solve something. And also you find out how exciting it is. I think if we're talking about sustainability or climate change, it's an incredibly big, dreadful problem. And I don't know how in the world we're going to solve it.
Mhm.
But at the same time, at least I'm doing something and the people around me are doing something to solve it. And I think that's a starting point.
Yeah.
So can I ask both of you, because what I'm listening to is two young people who are deeply motivated. The issues you're facing are the same as the issues that all of us are facing, and you're saying you're feeling them overwhelming on occasions. But you've also talked about sort of meeting up and working with like-minded people. And so I'd like to, if you may, I'd like you to explore that, how that works, because in some of the organizations, certainly the rest of us work with, there's often, a fairly senior leader who's responsible for sustainability, or but it's always a small team. It's always a sort of almost a little group off to the side who do the sustainability piece, and everyone else gets on with the day job.
That's what Douwe does.
Right, and we meet these people, and they're wonderful people trying to do fantastic things, but they really do feel quite isolated. In a very large organization, they're underfunded. They're trying to push a sort of heavy stone up a hill all the time, trying to get people to understand that sustainability is more than just putting a plastic bottle in a waste bin occasionally. I'd love to explore with you how do you manage to keep going? How do you build those networks that you've obviously got tapped into? What gives you the energy?
Interesting. I like this question. I think first of all, I do want to step out a little bit of the frame of this heavy responsibility and there's so much difficulty. I think change can be really exciting, and so that's something that I really that gives me a lot of fuel, I would say. And as Eva said, I think being in this area can be it's just invigorating. There's a lot of people who just think the same, but yeah, you do sometimes get slapped back, and that is difficult, and then you sort of whine about it or you find your way. But I think there's different levels. So first of all, I think that's good to know. So I also in some ways get a bit of enjoyment from going against the flow, or maybe the current, so to say. And that gives me some sort of motivation. At the same time, I think things are really changing. I think people are starting to really understand that sustainability is more than just recycling your plastic bottle, or coming with a different cup to Starbucks or whatever. Like we're the tipping point of going to a mass extinction. Like there's no way to go around this. Like it is a very urgent problem, and it shows. I mean, people our age suffer from climate depression. That has been a diagnosed thing. Greta Thunberg being one of the first to openly speak about this. And so, yeah, like I said, I think there is a lot of putting down, but that energy comes really, I think, from the Friday for Future, seeing thousands and thousands of children, young people all around the world going onto the streets. It comes from seeing the most incredible innovations starting up from hubs where Eva's in right now. I think it goes to show, one of the things where I was just mind-boggled was to see that the Bank of England all of a sudden makes an announcement and says, well, being the financial neoclassical heart of our financial system and our capitalist society, goes out and says, well, this is, climate change isn't not about just recycling your bottle anymore. This is about real change, and this needs to be done through finance as well. To me is very exciting to see that this is really starting to take off, but not quick enough yet. So I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think to add to what Douwe is adding, that's one side. And I think also I think it's, and this may sound right, it's a smart career choice to go into sustainability or circular economy or all these topics, because it's going to be the future. So like, I wouldn't go into work at an oil company like Shell now, because I just don't think it's that relevant in 50 years anymore. So I think it's also the relative field to be in right now. That doesn't mean that sometimes it's incredibly frustrating to talk to municipalities where we want to put down our tiles, for example, and experiment with our tiles because it's an innovative new product, or a big construction company, and you sometimes feel this, there's energy with what you said, Matthew, like within in an energy transition or sustainability department, but the moment you step out of that department, there's this they ask the wrong questions and they ask the old questions. And I think that is part of the problem, that we also have to relearn how we look at the world and what type of questions we ask about the products that we use or the services that we use. And that is something that just takes time. That also took time for me. It still takes time for me. Like, I didn't become a vegetarian all of a sudden. I didn't start a startup within a circular economy all at once. I think it's a process that you go through, and everyone goes through a different process. I think within this whole field or industry, everyone takes a role that fits their personality best. I think, like, I have friends that are activists for Extinction Rebellion, but I have also friends that work within municipalities, but I also have friends that work at port authorities, and then I have friends that have startups. I think you need all these change at all these types of levels, and that comes together somewhere, somehow, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think really pick your lane is what they sometimes say. I think it supports each other. I, being in a more institutionalized port authority, allows me to be very close to where decisions are being made and to challenge status quo and business as usual thinking. At the same time, I can't do that alone. As I said before, I think the energy for me comes from working together, but it also leads to the success because you get activists or lobbyists working outside to also turn up the heat, and that works. I think that is a really good way to create that change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it sounds that if you that you sort of either conscious or unconsciously, you seek your own network of people who are like-minded and can help with this movement of awareness of sustainability. And sometimes you perceive that it's really hard to really get the older generations, so to say, with you in your mindset. Are there any specific ways that you try to as a sort of movement, that you try to help them to make this mind shift as well? Because it sounds like it's you feel the responsibility of solving all the issues of the earlier generations before you, but how do you try to involve those generations, or is it even possible, do you think?
It's 100% possible. I think it just requires that you sit down and you show enthusiasm about something and you show that something different is possible. And there's always people that don't want to change anything, but I think it's often also just about not knowing the possibilities that are out there. And I think that's what it starts with. Mm-hmm. So it's but I don't know if there's a specific strategy. I think it really depends also on who you're talking to and what you're talking to them about. Yeah.
I'd like just to chuck a slightly controversial thought into this. We keep talking about generations, and I'm not sure I agree with the sort of hypothesis that the younger generation is having to clear up the mess of the previous generation, because I'm sure the previous generation probably thought they were clearing up the messes of the previous generation. And certainly if you speak to my mother at 95, Richard's grandmother, she'd be saying, well, we had to clear up the mess that the 19th century sort of politicians and colonialists and all the other people did. But there's also the challenge that whatever we do individually, so any of us on this conversation now, could be acutely aware of sustainability and the environment, and we've gone as green as we possibly can in all sorts of ways. We've used new building materials on our house. But if we're not all doing it, then there's always that comment, well, yeah, because 50,000 of us in Holland do it, or 50,000 of us in UK do it. What about the billions of people around the world who either can't afford to do it or don't have at the moment the resources to be able to do it? They may not even have the education. You know, to some people, a plastic bottle is a lifeline to food lying in a ditch rather than the recycling possibility. So how do we get, for your generation, how do you think we should approach that? Because that seems to be huge. I mean, that's the essence of what we're talking about, isn't it?
I think I agree with you in some ways. I don't always stand behind the hypothesis of the sort of generational gap. I think I always think of the mind the gap sign in the UK tube, and I don't think that's something we really. I have experienced both that gap and really not at all. So I think I agree with you in some ways that there's more that unites us. I guess that's something we also learn at our international school, that maybe that we have differences. There's more commonalities, but at the same time, I do see, and I think Ava really concurs with this, the way that I think a more young and fresh perspective, where you maybe think the sky is the limit, can allow for a lot more open thinking in organizations, which is the reason why you see a lot more organizations including young people in their, maybe not their board of directors, but their sort of top level above that advisory board. Or you see CEOs or C-suite executives working with interns that allow them to sort of keep them sharp at every point of the way and making important decisions. Because it really does, I think I've been working now for a year and I already see how I sometimes fall back and say, oh no, that's not possible because we tried that a few months ago. And so I can only imagine how, if you've been in the work field for decades, you might be a bit more laid back. And so, and see things, oh, well, that will solve itself. And I think that is a mindset that might still create that change. So far, I've really seen how that's created very valuable impact. Yeah, don't know how.
I really agree with what Douwe is saying, and I think what allows young people to be a bit more critical, maybe, but also be a bit naive, which I think is a really positive personality trait. If you're naive, I think we often put naive down as something that's young and stupid and not useful, but I think it really is, because it allows you to think a lot bigger. But what happens with what I think is different for my parents, who are 50, still quite young, it's not their future that you're talking about. In the end, it's I'm 22, it's my future, and it's gonna be my future for a long time. And I don't think it's not that my parents don't care about my future. I think they really do, and I think they really care about the future of their grandchildren. But I think the existential feeling that you can feel, and I think that existential feeling is real when we talk about climate change and biodiversity laws and all these big problems. My parents can't experience that because it's not their future. I once had a professor who said in a climate change course, and she said, okay, by the end of in this class, I want everyone to at least have cried once. Maybe it wasn't very good pedagogy, but her point was that it's climate change and our future, it's so big and it's so incomprehensible. So it's not something that you can deal with rationally. You also have to feel it and internalize it to do something with it. And I think that's a lot easier for young people to do than for older people to do. That doesn't mean that older people don't want to do anything. I think there's a lot of older people that are really doing things that are incredibly important, and they're supporting others, and they're trying to do everything in their power. But I think that existential feeling is part of what makes you a bit more maybe spirited and energetic and active.
Yeah, the urgency of it, I think.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I think you may be one of the first generations where that threat is internalized in the way you describe it, Eva. And just listening to you makes me feel just even more concerned than I already am, because my kids are your age. And when I was your age, I was a student going from one party to the next, and even
We still are, don't worry.
Yeah, sure. But phrases like mass extinction and climate depression, I had no idea what that was at 22. And so, yes, you may be right that you need to sort of internalize that more than we are able to. My question to you would be, given that we probably can't internalize it the same way, and I also agree with you, Douwe, that the generations are not as clear cut, but what can we, with our decades more experience, how can we help you best? How can we support you best, other than, by eating less meat and recycling our plastic? What do you need from us?
I think more than anything, it's I think it's giving us space to do whatever we believe is right to do, and I think listening, and at the same time giving advice on how we can best approach things. I think you guys know pathways to getting things done a lot better than I do, or I think Douwe do, because you've been doing this for a longer time. So I think that is incredibly valuable knowledge. But I think it's working together with us, with young people. I think that's the one thing that you can do. I think, of course, you can eat less meat, but now comes your cliche quote, or what. I always make this argument, and that was always like, Eva, calm down. But we have a lot of individual responsibility, but I think individual responsibility is sometimes also it goes too far, because if you only talk about individualized responsibility and, for example, eating less meat, we forget that we're also part of a society, and we're residents of the city, and we can vote, and all these things I think are a lot more important than eating less meat. I'm not saying you should eat a lot of meat, but I think it's for me, I think it's a lot more important to understand that I'm part of something bigger, and that also is what motivates me. If I would only, and then I think if you participate in society and you're trying to do something, you're trying to make society a little bit better, I think that's a lot more valuable than eating less meat. But then I think everyone should do that, also older people, also younger people.
I agree. I think our generation thinks a lot more about system change, and I think that system change comes from thinking across boundaries, across sort of generations. Things like intersectionalism is something that is, I feel, my generation, and interestingly, I think it might be good to note that I think Eva and I are sort of on the verge of both being a millennial, but also a Gen Z, or a Zoomer, now called. And I think those generations really sort of think that way of how can we combine our fight or struggle with certain things and join forces. I think that's really interesting, and I think the same idea goes with what you asked. What can we provide or do? And I think it really is a seat at the table, and a way to listen. And I think if you think about that system change, that the systems are built up, made by different institutions, and upheld by people who have been in those positions for a long time, and in some ways. And I think that if you want to just think about changing them, you need that new perspective. So it could be really useful to bring out those, and so then think about diversity, not just in generations, but also in cultural diversity, racially, all kinds of things. And I think that has really shown again and again, and I'm really proud to see how that's taken a even bigger flight in 2020, is how that diversity at the table can really make a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Diversity at the table even means that Douwe and I sometimes have to make place, because, like, if I speak for myself, but I think I also can speak for Douwe, we're not the diverse. We're young, but that's basically only. Besides that, I've had everything going for me in my life. I'm incredibly privileged. So that also, and I think I like to see that conversation is already happening around me. That even young people now are a lot more aware of where they come from and what their background is, and how that is relevant. I think that's also something that you understand the relevance of the position that you have in society.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, I'm just curious, is there anything happening on the live stream? Oh, that is lovely. Ian, you're on mute. I can see you talk, but you're on mute.
I'm on double mute. I had two mute buttons. But if I could ask you both around inspiration. So you talk a lot about activism. I think I heard the word fight just now, and I'm getting drawn into like, so who's the enemy here? Who are we actually targeting our energy at? And I don't know what it is. Is it the system? Is it some of the generations? But I'm wondering about inspiration. As you look across the generations, particularly as you look up to the older generations, who inspires you most? Where do you get some of your inspiration from, your hope?
Eva, do you want to go first?
No, I really wouldn't know. Like, I'm really bad at this, but that way go shoot, and maybe I'll come up with something.
Well, let me put it this way. I think the fight is my way of using that definition. I guess comes from me. The way that I define that is because I every time, as we discussed this at the beginning of the talk, this discussion is, you need to gain that energy to go out there again and again and again to fight those people who might be just telling you no and maybe next time. And so in that way, it can feel like a fight. So I'm a peaceful protester. I think that's very good to note. But at the same time, inspiration, well, let me put it, at the beginning of this year, I was in the United States for the Democratic primaries. And someone that I have really aspired to or find a lot of inspiration from is Bernie Sanders. And I think a lot of people were still mesmerized by how such a young, diverse generation could fall in love, really, with an old, white, Jewish man who was just, been saying the same thing for decades now. Maybe that's his strength, his consistency. And I guess for a lot of Europeans, a sense of, well, haven't we already been there a few decades ago? Speaking of healthcare for everyone and accessible education. But I love the way that how he was not falling for identity politics and how he was really thinking about that system change. So that's something that's really inspired me to think more about building that coalition. And his slogan really is "Not me, us," and that's something I find really inspirational.
Thank you. And Eva?
Yeah, I don't think I have. I really couldn't come up with one person. I think it's. I think there's a ton of people every day that are doing incredibly inspiring stuff. What I think, but what you were saying about the word fight, forgive me, I don't see it so much as a fight. I think it's quite irrelevant also to talk about camps and fighting and who's to blame, because and that's what we came back to before. I think in the end it's a system, and you want system change, and a system is no one's fault or no one's mistake. I think it's just something that happens because of history and because of the choices that we made and the economic policies that we had for good reasons, because at that point we thought it was best, but it doesn't mean that because we thought something was best, it's still best. And I think that's mostly how I see it or how I view it. I think we shouldn't think about these things too much in terms of camps, but about how can we bring with us enough people so that we move how we see what's happening. And I think that takes time, and that's frustrating. And I think I'm here and Douwe is here to maybe accelerate that a bit and let it go a bit faster, because I think it's going too slow right now because we have climate change and because we have these incredible problems. And I think maybe right now, like within the next 30 years, 10 years preferably, we have to change a lot more than we've changed over the past 50 years. And that requires action. But I think everyone feels that something has to change. I also don't think it's I think that will make it a lot easier. I think up until now, we thought everyone, like, that's the whole Fukuyama idea, the end of history. This is the world as it will be forever, or this is how the Western world will be as it is forever. And now we realize that's not the case, because we have a collapsing middle class, because we have incredible wealth inequality. Yeah, so something has to change, but that's the system. And how do you change the system? You change it because everyone starts behaving a little bit differently.
Yeah. And the challenge with systems, of course, is that they are slow. They are slow to change because they are embedded, and it's the way in which people have worked, and they've always worked like that. So that's the challenge that we all face.
Precisely, and that's incredibly annoying because we have to go faster.
Okay, so picking up on that fast a bit, to give you an example, on the BBC News last night, they announced that the government have brought in or thinking of bringing various measures to reduce the use of diesel and petrol cars. Mm-hmm. They've suddenly shortened the time from, I think it was 2050 down to the next 10 years. And immediately there was a great outcry. Well, how on earth can car manufacturers do this in 10 years rather than in 30? And then they showed some houses in Oxford, I don't know whether Brit saw it because she lives in Oxford, that were being converted to having heat pumps. They were public homes owned by the local authority, and they were putting heat pumps in to reduce the use of gas and oil heating. And the engineer on site said, well, these are costing £15,000 or 20,000 euros, say, per house, just on this small estate. And so I know in our household, we'd say, well, fabulous idea, but hey, how the hell is anyone going to afford 20,000 euros per house? And there are 35 million houses in the UK that you might want to do this to. And I just wonder whether perhaps sometimes the opportunity to be able to answer that question, how do we do this? Because I think the argument's probably been one as to what we need to do. But children on the street on a Friday isn't going to convince me, of an older generation, how I can help to afford to pay for your generation to have a heat pump put in your house or to have solar panels put on your roof. There's that to me seems to be the really big question, and not just in Holland or in the UK, both very wealthy countries, but how do we do that globally?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think I would love to see that answered. I think we're going to see that answered within the next 50 years. But I think I'm also curious how we're going to do it, but we have to do it. I think COVID is a perfect example. All of a sudden, we were able to stay within our houses. If you would have suggested a year ago that the government forces us to stay in our house, to wear masks, these are incredibly big changes. Like, we moved our whole working space from offline to online. It's just, and we were able to do that. And I think we didn't like it so much, but we did it. And I think we are used to it now. And it's still not perfect, and we have to change it a lot. But I think for me, that showed almost how easy it is to create a radical change to do something like this. And this is a crisis. And everyone agrees it is a crisis, or not everyone. There's of course some protest and conspiracy. The more conspiracy theorists that are that don't really believe this is a real thing. But I think it is, for me, that showed it is possible. It just requires us to believe the problem is large enough. And when do we? And the question is then, when do we believe the problem is large enough? And if you believe the problem is large enough, you start voting differently. And maybe making certain sacrifices that you didn't think were previously possible to do what needs to be done. But maybe Douwe has a different answer.
Maybe you pick on a massive point here around communication, information, data. And I'm curious to both of you, where do you get your data from? I'm an engineer, and I'll always be an engineer, but I can cope with data, without data. But it's always important to have a source of news or a feed or something. And what we believe is based on something. Right, and that drives our behaviors. I'm curious, where do you get your data from?
I love that question. I think it's always really interesting I like to ask that question also to leaders or people who are at the top of the chain, because I'm always interested to how they get their news. Especially today, there's so many opportunities, so many ways of getting access, and it's so easy to build yourself into some sort of echo chamber where you just hear what you want to hear. And I think that is something that our generation arguably could do better. I think, but that is also because we are in some ways a victim of and companies who want you to click on the things that prove or seem impossible or appetizing. Personally, I try to. I'm aware of how I get steered in certain directions, so I really try to go across the board. I love the phenomenon of what is called hate watching or hate reading. It is where you would deliberately go on to maybe some to a channel or a newspaper where you don't usually get your news from, or from which you know that you don't actually agree with. So maybe hate is not the right word, but well, that's the way that people describe this phenomenon. But it's something you see coming up a lot more. So yeah, I do sometimes steer into maybe newspapers, for example, in the States. While watching the elections, I like to read sources which are extremely left-wing and might be a little bit radical, but at the same time also look to sources of Breitbart or maybe Fox News, just to see how they put their spin on what's happening. And I think ultimately this goes to show how important it is that our younger generations are taught to always look for, not to just see education as something that's just given to them in one direction, but to always question. And I think that's something really the school that Eva and I both went to, the United World College, was really teaching us, like, look at this information critically. What do you think is different? We were sat in a classroom being taught about the Second World War, but the Japanese student in my class would have a completely different view as to how that war evolved compared to maybe me from Rotterdam and the Netherlands. And so that has always challenged me to always look at the things that I write or read critically. And I think that might actually be an interesting thing, because I feel like that might be a generational gap sometimes, where I see my mother reading things and just easily copy it or say, well, and if I ask her, where did you read this? Well, you know, it was on Facebook. And there you go. So it's yeah, I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, but I think it's a big challenge, and I think it's also that's also when education becomes so incredibly important. I think I only learned to be so critical of what I read and what I consume, and but also in university, because I had to consume so much knowledge, and that at some point that if teachers or anyone keeps asking the question, okay, but where does this come from? When was it written? They're the basic questions, but I think it's still very, very relevant. I think for me, I think I do something. I don't do a lot of hate reading. Actually, I didn't know the phenomena, so it's interesting. But what I do is that I have this in the Netherlands. You now have this app which is called Blendel, and basically they select the best news outlets, the best articles that are written that day, but they're from all types of different platforms. So that's from from basically from the Telegraaf to, for the Dutch listener, from the Telegraaf to the Volkskrant to het AD, which I really like. So they really they pick the best articles, and that's, of course, I think it's very hard to. You're in a bubble, and I don't think you. There's something you can do about it, but in the end, you're in a bubble. And I think the best you can do is just realize that you're in a bubble and try to steer away from that bubble sometimes a little bit. But sometimes it's also nice and comfortable to be in a bubble. I think we also, I think that's also, the bubble sometimes also gives you a lot of inspiration and energy, but I think that's when, it's a bit tricky, I think, but I think it's also being critical of each other. I think that's the trick too.
I think if I just can add to this, I think what for me would be a sort of life mission is to normalize the way that people can come back on what they previously thought.
Yeah.
And so in Dutch we say standpunt, and they're now talking about a stondpunt, which is just the past tense of your position on a certain matter. And I think it's really, really interesting to see how people just are so afraid to go back to maybe a decision that they made, or to critically look at and say, well, actually, I thought that now, but I've really changed. For me, just this year again of seeing all those Black Lives Matter protests all around the world has opened my eyes once again on how institutionalized racism is throughout the world, and some really scary colonial thinking that in so many ways is still out there. And that was something that I, as a white man, have never experienced, and it really needs you to look back and open your eyes to new sources of information, and again go into that dialogue with people. And so here we go again, that seat at the table that can really help.
Thank you.
Yeah, good, wonderful. I could spend the rest of the day just in this conversation and talking to all of you, but I am also conscious of the time. So the words that stand out for me from this are change, our intergenerational collaboration, our curiosity. It's good to be naive, and I agree with that. And an incredible amount of energy that just comes out of the two of you, which I applaud you for. I also think, and you said, Douwe, you said that you'd like to ask Ian's question about the data to leaders. And I would just, we at least, Let's Talk Leadership, we're always on about that leadership does not sit in the highest office anymore. So in that sense, it's a shared process. We believe that leadership is shared, the responsibility is shared, and the efforts are shared. And in that sense, you, the two of you, even though you may not have decades of experience or immense power, you are leaders in your own right. I hope you buy into that. I hope you understand that, and you believe that you know, by doing what you did from age 15, deciding that you wanted to go to a school where you could open up and contribute and be relevant, that is a leadership step. That is self-leadership, and that is awareness. Your concern about society, that is global leadership at its best, even though it's young, or maybe even thanks to the fact that it's so young. I see you as young leaders. I do. I hope you see yourself as that as well. Don't know what the others think.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You know, if anything we've learned, and I shall describe myself as the oldest generation here. If there's anything I've learned in the 68 years I've been on this planet, it's actually leadership can appear at an incredibly early age. You know, just two children in a playground and one of them helping another, or one of them suggesting doing something that might be slightly different. That's leadership. You know, as you've described, Brit, beautifully, you know, Eva and Douwe, you know, deciding at 15 to do what you wanted to do and continually changing and challenging your own thoughts and challenging upwards and challenging across. That's leadership. You know, it's not, it really isn't the plaque on the door and the executive suite on the 30th floor of some skyscraper and your personal car parking space. You know, that is not leadership.
It's probably about those people realizing that what you just said is also true for us and for everyone that's taking up responsibility that they have. And I think if that happens, then you go fast, because if we realize there are many more leaders than we think, that means there's more space and more seats at the table for these people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I totally recognize it as well, Brit. 2 years ago, I was involved in selecting these young students for UWC, and I was really impressed by the ideas and the drive of these young people, and in that sense, the leadership that they've already taken to be courageous enough to take the step to go to the other end of the world, to have their high school there, and to show their vulnerability also in that and to learn about it, and it's amazing to talk to you both and to see what is happening with those people after a couple of years, and how you feel the responsibility and take the responsibility. And to be honest, I feel sort of in a sort of way, I feel that you deserve it with this mission that you described for yourself. You deserve it to get also the support for it. So that's something that I really wish for you, that you always have and find the support that you need on your journey.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you all very, very much. And before we all sign off, Richard, could I maybe ask you to stop the live stream so that we can have a few more words of thanks to our wonderful guests. So please hang on, everybody. Right, done.